Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Conversations with Adrian. Today, I've got Muska, who's a representative from NASCSP, and we're going to focus today's conversation on community transformations, community initiatives, that type of thing, which, as many of you know, is reported on the annual report in Module 3. So, Muska, can we start with you introducing yourself and letting everybody know a little bit about you?
Sure. Thanks, Adrian, for having me, and I'm excited to be here with you guys in Illinois. I'm the CSBG project manager at NASCSP, so we're the National Association for the State Administrators. And what we really do is focus very much so on the annual report. We're the ones who put together the instruction manuals for the report, so always be sure to check those out. We continuously develop tools and training and technical assistance focus on the annual report, whether it's Module 2 and 4, whether it's Module 3. We're the ones that review the data. So if Adrian's asking you questions, a lot of times it's probably coming back from us. So don't grill him too hard for that.
I'm glad you say that because I think some of them think I'm just a mean ogre and continue to ask more questions.
Right. So basically at NASCSP, we just focus a lot on the annual report and try to give out as much guidance as possible. And so that's why we're here right now to try to talk more about Module 3 and what reporting on Module 3 looks like.
Right. So let's start. So Module 3 is a community initiative, community transformations. I still call it, and I think in our conversations, you still kind of call it community initiatives. OCS, I think, prefers to call it community transformations. Can you kind of talk, what exactly are we talking about on community initiatives? How would you define that?
Sure. So referring to what Adrian said, OCS did a few months ago, back in February, rename it to call it community transformation. And I'm actually going to refer to the specific policy where they provided their definition of what a community transformation is. And you'll see why I think that they renamed it to transformation. So if you actually read the definition at some point, you can easily access it online on OCS's website. What a community level transformation is it's a project designed to create measurable community-wide improvement. So that's the first step of it, right? What is community-wide improvement? And later through this conversation, we're going to talk about the difference between, improvement at the individual family level versus improvement at the community level. But for right now, we know that community work has to change the community overall. And I think that's primarily why they renamed it to transformation. And I think that's really a key piece of this, is that something needs to be transformed at the community level. We know we transform individual and family lives 24/7 at community action, but now we really need to start thinking about how are we transforming the overall community as well. And so how do you get community-wide improvement? Well, the next piece of the definition is it has to affect one or more cause or condition of poverty. And we know there are individual conditions of poverty. A lot of those individual conditions, I would say, tend to be symptoms of poverty as well. But then there are also just community conditions overall. And so what that really comes down to is knowing what a community level need is. And we do community needs assessments, and we try to figure out what are the needs out there in the community. And as you do that process, you really need to think about you need to delve deeper into what that need is. So for example, just a simple example that we like to do is a lot of times we hear people need jobs. That's a really big need that is always out there in any community needs assessment. And you really need to delve deeper into that because there can be different dimensions to that need, right? Do people need jobs because they themselves do not have the skills to get the jobs that are available in the community? Because that is really an individual and family level need, right? That's the need of individuals to gain certain skills, et cetera. Or do people need jobs because there just aren't jobs available in the community, right? And so that's a different dimension. So if the issue is that there are no jobs available in the community, you could open a new job training program to help people get skills, but is that actually going to make a difference at the community level? No, right? Because you're just helping people gain skills, but there are no jobs for them. So even if they gain skills, it's still not addressing the issue of no jobs. So that's what we mean when we say cause or condition of poverty. What are the things that are contributing to poverty and causing it in the communities? And so a community transformation seeks to change those conditions of poverty. So in the example I just gave, it would be bringing jobs into the community versus helping people get jobs. Once you bring the jobs, you can help the people get the jobs. But the bringing the jobs is the community aspect of this. And the other piece of this transformation, go ahead.
Before we move on to the next piece, we're both of us have used quite a few times the word community, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that we're aware that a community isn't necessarily our entire service area.
Yeah.
So here in Illinois, all of our service areas are defined by county borders and that for the most part. So they're pretty well defined as you've got this single county or you've got this 5, 6, 7, 8 counties. But a community can also just be a subsection, and probably most effectively as a lot of these community transformations or community projects are probably more effective at a smaller level where we're looking at a specific neighborhood within that service area as opposed to the wide service area. And I think that that's important to make sure that we get that out there as opposed to having people thinking that if we're doing a community work, it has to affect the entire community, the entire service area equally. And this is a case that not necessarily. Would you agree with that?
That is a really, really important point. And you're exactly right. I mean, the community is not your entire service area. It can be. I mean, it depends upon what you're trying to get out of your project. It can be your entire service area. It can be just your county. If your service area has multiple counties, it could just be one county. It could just be a very specific neighborhood, right? Because we know even in one county, there are vast differences in different locations of a county, right? Northern side might be, having more issues than the southern side, et cetera. Or maybe it's even just one very particular neighborhood, a particular zip code. It could even just be a school district. I mean, you could get down as small as that. So the community is really up to the agency to define based off of the needs that you find out there, right? Do you know that one particular zip code has a challenge with school readiness, for example? Then maybe you want to work with the school district there. And so it really is up. I've seen a really unique example also where a community wasn't necessarily a geographical location. I think in one submission that I'd received, a community was I'm trying to remember, the Black and Native American population of a particular county. So it was a demographic community. Community can be whatever, the agency defines for the purpose of what they're about to engage in.
Yeah, I had never really thought about community being based on a certain demographic or something like that. That's an interesting interesting concept and interesting thoughts. So yeah, so we can move on to the third part of the definition.
Yep. So first, the first part is obviously it needs to address a cause or condition of poverty, right? The second is this transformation piece of it, right? And how do you know that it's transformed is you need to have clearly defined and measurable goals. And I think that is the biggest key here, because it really speaks to an intentionality behind this project. Like a lot of times they hear, we have a lot of homelessness ventures out there and they do phenomenal work. And so obviously the goal there is to reduce homelessness, right? That's why we're doing these services. But for community level transformation, you need to know and keep track of whether or not that transformation is in fact occurring. And in order to do that, you need to be looking at at some measure of success, and you need to have targets. So there needs to be an intentionality. And when you're coming together and coming up with this project, you need to say, okay, we are going to either add 10 homes in the next 3 years. Very clear target that you're there and you're measuring, the things that you're adding. Or if you're focusing on a community statistic, again, you need to have a clear target and say, we will reduce the homelessness rate by 1% in 5 years, right? It doesn't have to be some massive target where we have 0 homelessness or whatever, or we reduce it by half. It can just be, we're going to reduce it by 1% in this time frame. So that's really the second piece of this, that there has to be an intentional target and clear measure that you are working towards. And then do you have a question there?
Yeah, well, I was going to make a comment. I think it's great to emphasize that it doesn't have to be a huge change. I think a lot of times we get caught up and the old Roma adage with the baseball averages and things like that. I think everybody's heard that 5,462 times at least. But I think it's important for us to start kind of thinking, in order for community action to be effective, or in order for our work in community action to be effective, we don't have to do a complete change. We don't have to end poverty. We don't have to end homelessness or get unemployment to a 0. But we want to do what we can to make as large of a positive effect on that as we can. And so we need to be setting realistic targets and not not necessarily the pipe dreams. And I'm having some AC work done at the house, so that's why I'm down in the basement. It's the coolest room of the house. But anyway, so we need to have realistic goals, and even if a realistic goal is just moving it, a percentage point or a half of a percentage point, depending on what it is, or something that maybe seems small, it's actually a lot of times a pretty tough goal to achieve. And I think we'd rather see us be able to have obtainable goals as opposed to not obtainable goals. So.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point also, Adrian, that community level transformation, right, doesn't have to be this entire restructuring and now we solve the world's problem type of thing. And I do feel like sometimes that maybe that idea gets put out there just from the examples, because there are some agencies that are doing a lot of this great, multifaceted, citywide type of thing. But there are also agencies that are, their transformation is, we're going to add one community garden. And, a community garden is a huge asset to a community where there is no access to fresh food, and it's fairly, simple to put together. It might even just happen in 1 year, and it's just one simple strategy that they're focusing on and that they're going to implement, but it does make a difference and does transform that community. So yes, you can have a wide range of transformative activities. And so the third piece of this is you need to identify what strategies will get you there, right? And I think I'll talk about a couple examples. I think, Adrian, even you're going to have an example later on. But that strategy, you really need to look into, are the strategies that you are engaging in or saying that you will engage in, are those actually going to be effective at addressing the problem, right? So, if we're talking about, for example, the unemployment rate is too high, well, why is it high? Is it because there are no jobs, or is it because people don't have skills, right? It's just going back to that conversation. If the issue is no jobs, then you doing the job training program is not really going to impact the problem. So you really need to show that the strategies you're going to engage in is actually going to put a dent into the problem.
Right.
And so those are really the 3 key components of community transformation.
Yeah, and I think that's a great foundation, especially as we talk a little bit and about kind of as we're writing the scope of work, at least here in Illinois on it. Those are definitely need to show up in that scope of work. So we need to be talking about how you've identified the community. So, maybe identifying the community as saying it's this city or this township or this school district. Maybe it's identifying a community as between North Grand Avenue and Monroe Street, between 27th Avenue and 35th Avenue, and identifying the community in that type of manner. So as you're writing your scope of works for these, we need to identify the community you're looking at. We need to identify the problem, which Muska talked about on that, and then talk about, and then the next step is talk about what how we're going to work to kind of alleviate some of those that situation in that community, and talking about the partners, community work, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Muska. While community action uses partners a lot, community work we're really using partners, and a lot of our community initiatives were there. You could do a community initiative just as the agency yourself, but in all likelihood, these community initiatives, we're talking about working with 2, 3, 4 multiple partners, all coming together, utilizing our expertise and our resources that each of us have individually to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. Would you agree with that, or am I off a little bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I kind of just took partners for granted there.
Yeah.
And didn't even point them out. But yes, I mean, partnerships they're very key. And I know that OCS also really is pushing for community level transformation to have partnerships. There is an option on the form for independent CAA initiatives. And there could be certain instances where maybe it is just the agency doing something. But for the most part, I mean, if you really are transforming a community, right, and you're coming up with strategies to do it, an agency alone is probably not going to be able to do it just by themselves. And so you really do need to engage partners and bring them at the table, and then come together with a plan, an action plan for how each of you are going, what is the target that at the end of the day, all of you are working towards, and then how does each player contribute to this target to move along the project?
Yeah, and as we talk about the project and the duration, I think it's also important to talk about the fact that, and you touched on a little bit as you were talking about and defining the community initiatives, but it also is worth repeating or making sure it's clear. A lot of these community initiatives, we don't expect, and OCS doesn't expect, NASCSP doesn't expect this to occur overnight, or even in the course of a month or 6 months. These projects it may take a year or 2 years or 3 years or longer to really do for these projects to come to fruition, and get all the partners together, and get all the approvals or the changes and the research and all that's needed. So it could take a number of years for these projects to actually go all the way through to the end phase. So
we've seen 10-year plans, we've seen 5-year plans, we've even seen 1-year plans, right, for the sort of more smaller targeted initiatives. So yes, I mean, we're not expecting it to happen overnight, and especially if you are engaging, all those partners and you are trying to show a real change, that will probably happen over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and I think from my talk with some of our network here in Illinois, I think some of them have steered away from the longer term things, thinking I need the immediate outcome. I need to be able to show you that what we're doing right now, and yeah, we can't stress enough that and we're talking about this work. It's not necessarily the immediate outcomes. It's whatever that project takes in order for it to be successful and have the best, most lasting impact that we can have.
And especially for something like community statistics, you may not even have access to that on a yearly basis. So, that in and of itself tells you that you won't be able to track any change for 2 to 3 years, depending upon when the statistic comes out.
Right. So let's kind of move towards talking about what a community initiative, talking about the community initiative itself. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've seen when we did the annual report review here at the state level. Some of the things that I saw and um, get some of your feedback on it, comments on it, and then maybe get some examples, some ideas from you, if that sounds good. So one thing I saw that we had submitted to us was an agency that had identified the problem in a specific neighborhood. They did an excellent job identifying the community, the neighborhood that they were in. They identified the problem as a higher crime rate occurring, after dark, and they attributed that to the lack of lighting, very good lighting in the neighborhood on the streets and all that. So all of that looked really good, and I was really excited about this community initiative. And then as I read more into it, how they went about approaching it, them and partners kind of went door to door giving families LED bulbs or light bulbs to use in their front doors so that they would turn on their lights at night to brighten up the thing. And to me, that's where we lost it from being a community initiative to being more of a family individual type service, because we could track it to the exact family that benefit. There's no guarantees that they're going to use those bulbs in their front porch, or they're going to flip switch. To me, what would make it a community initiative is working with the various partners to have more street lights put in along the streets, and that's what would really make it the community initiative. Is what are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, so I think this has a good frame set up. I think there is community level potential here, and I think they're thinking along the right path. If we go back to the definition, right, are they addressing a cause or condition of poverty? So they're looking at crime rates. And so that in itself is a community-wide thing that they're looking at. So that's a good start. Are they trying to transform that? So out of curiosity, what are they actually measuring? Are they actually measuring a change in the crime rate?
So what they were measuring is the number of what they were actually ended up measuring is the number of these home efficiency light bulb boxes that they handed out, which is, yeah, to me, on a community initiative, we have two different options on that to kind of measure. We could measure the change in the crime rate in that community, which as we just talked about would probably make it a 3, 4, 5 year project, because the first year is getting things lined up. The second year probably getting the lights up and in place and ran. The third year is finally when you can start measuring it, and then you need at least third and fourth year, maybe even the fifth year to actually see how those numbers are adjusting. And the other way I thought that they could have came back is to start off by saying more of a count of change. There's only X number of streetlights in the neighborhood at the start of this project, and at the end of this project, there's Y number, and that to me would have been a little bit of a shorter term project, because you're just changing the streetlights. Would that have been a good count on that, or would the crime rate be
right? If their need was, we're looking at, because we do know, in certain low-income communities, right, the upkeep of those communities or whatever, there might not be enough tax dollars, or the local government might not be investing as much in them. So we do know that we do have issues where, there aren't enough street lights, et cetera, and so that's what they're, that is the specific thing that they're focusing on, is the lack of street lights. They say we're going to bring in street lights, and we're doing this because research shows there's some connection between street lights and crime rates, et cetera. So yes, and I think that's what it is it needs to flow well. So if we go back to what they're starting off with, which is the crime rate, then notice it's not really flowing well if what you're counting is the light bulbs that you've passed out, right? because at that point you are counting the strategy, and so if you just say, does the count of light bulbs actually prove that there was any change or that there was any transformation? That's the first question. Whenever an agency is looking into community level work, they need to make sure that it's flowing well and that what they're measuring is related to the problem that they are addressing. You can certainly count strategies as sort of along the path, and here's the number of this that we did, the number of that we did. But at the end of the day, if the need is the crime rate, then you want to be able to measure a change in the crime rate to say that, there was a change there. And so I think that is sort of the challenge with this initiative, is that they are really tracking the strategy and reporting on the strategy rather than looking at the overall ultimate outcome. The other piece of this is going back to the conversation about strategies and looking into whether or not they will be effective in addressing the problem, right? So if it was just a simplistic, there are no street lights, we're going to bring in street lights or whatever, okay, boom, 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 it all flows well. But if it is crime rate and we're trying to change the crime rate, and your strategy is bringing in all of these light bulbs or street lamps or whatever it is, you just need to be able to show, maybe it's through research or whatever, you just need to say that these strategies, are they actually going to make a dent in the problem? So if you are giving just LED bulbs out to the families residing there, maybe, frankly, I just don't know enough to know if that is enough to make a change or not. I would think that you might need something else along with that, right? If you really want to improve the darkness in the alleys or whatever, you'd probably need to bring in some city resources. So that just goes back to seeing if the strategy, if it's sufficient enough to actually make a dent in the problem. So those are really the two things I would say for this initiative is what are you measuring? And it has to be the ultimate goal that you're after. And then is the strategy going to be effective enough?
Yeah. Now, and that brings me, since we're talking about this, it also brings me up kind of to another thing that I like to talk about whenever we talk about community initiatives, community strategies. When we're doing these projects that are affecting the community at whole, and again, how we write our work programs in Illinois, we write a work program, a community-based work program, and we have also family and individual-based work programs that we write. I think it's also important to say that we can have as a companion work program, we can have a different work program, a different scope of work that is also working with individual family members. So for example, in this project, using it as an example, I would think that if we had the overall arching one, community strategy is let's improve the lighting in the area because this study or that study shows that that's going to reduce the crime rate. And so we're going to do a couple different things. We're going to come in, we're going to increase the number of street lights. And then we're also going to work at the family individual level, getting them some high energy high energy efficiency bulbs and things such as that, and encourage residents to screw them in their front porches and turn on their porch lights at night to also help light up the area to get as bright as we can, to where the street lights and all that stuff is on the community initiative side. And then as we're tracking on the family individual side, those energy efficiency boxes that we're handing out. So is that something that you see submitted where the two kind of work hand in hand like that?
Yes. I mean, certainly I would say for something like a rate of change, right? For like homelessness rates or childhood obesity or substance abuse or crime rates, any of those rates, there's bound to be an individual and family level component there, right? And just to be clear, I think this also, I'm sort of going to go on a tangent, so just bear with me. But I also just want to stress that this isn't, the initiative is not that the agency is doing it all, right? So you could have multiple partners doing various types of things. So going back to the crime rate example, maybe the agency's role is just, as part of the partnership, their specific role is to provide the service of handing out LED bulbs, right? And then maybe if they have other partners involved in this, they have the city as a partner involved in bringing in street lamps and all of that, right? So just stressing that it's not that the agency has to be doing all of this themselves, that the agency may just be the service provider in a wider initiative to reduce homelessness that have other community level strategies happening, or to reduce childhood obesity, et cetera. So we've seen a lot of instances where we've had a lot of service providers in the same area get together, they identify gaps in their services, in their service delivery system, and they say, we're really seeing an increase in, say, childhood obesity, and we just need new programming. We just need to rethink how we do programs. We need to, just bring in more resources and add in different types of programs, et cetera, et cetera. We need to bring in mental health providers, all of that. So, so they add in programs and they do stuff at the community level, but then the people that are being served through those programs, right, the families that you are actually tracking, those need to be reported separately in Module 4. So you could have multiple facets to community level work, and especially for race, you are going to have some individual and family level component. The thing to just keep in mind is that in Module 3, you are reporting the community impact. And in Module 4 is where you could report all of the people that benefited from the community impact. So a really simple example is also like houses. We're going to build this many houses. Well, great, you've built the houses, that gets reported in Module 3, and now the people that you help move into those houses get reported in Module 4 instead. So the two definitely do go hand in hand in a lot of instances.
Can you give us, like, I know I just talked about an example that I saw on, can you give us an example of a good community initiative that maybe you've reviewed that you've seen at the national level, or maybe a common one that if there's any common themes that you've seen the same one come in, from multiple states or something like that, to kind of get people maybe thinking about, ooh, maybe I didn't think that's something that we could do, or something like that. Do you have an example or two that you could share with us?
Sure. So yes, let me just think of exactly which ones I want to share. So I've seen a good childcare one. I feel like childcare comes up a lot in a lot of instances. And it can be just individual family level, or it could be made into community level, right? So we've seen instances where, the issue is that there are not enough childcare providers in the area to meet the need for childcare out there. And a typical response we see is, we're just going to open a new location, right? And that works because you are opening a new program, and you will be bringing in one more resource there. But a lot of times that's also just sort of like an agency capacity type of thing, where the agency is just expanding its program, which certainly does bring in resources. But a really good example I've seen is that this agency kind of did, or rather this partnership, right, because it wasn't just the agency by itself. What they did was they did target a very specific area where they said they just have, they really do not have enough daycare providers there. So we're going to open a new program there. So they had the new program piece of it, but then what they also did is they worked with existing daycare providers in the area to get licensed and increase the number of slots that they have available. So what they're doing is, it's not them providing the service themselves, they're enabling the capacity of other daycare providers to increase, to increase their capacity. And, through the agency's own services, and then by enabling other daycare providers, they're actually increasing the amount of childcare slots that there are out there in the community. So I like that, because it's not just, we're going to have a service and we're going to add one new service. It's, we're going to enable other people to enhance their services also.
So that would have been a count of change then, as opposed to a rate of
Yes,
change?
yes,
Is
yes,
that
it would have exactly. Yep. And I think that, for counts of change, those are the ones where it's sort of more simplistic and, you don't necessarily need to show this huge, change in statistics or whatever. So this was very much a targeted initiative, very simple, I think, for a lot of agencies to carry out also, where it was just a count of change. And it wasn't just we're adding a program ourselves, it's we're helping other daycare providers get licenses and be able to improve their capacity.
Yeah, and I'm going to wrap this part up, but the last, and before we move into the reporting part, the last thing I wanted to speak on just a second, as we're talking about rates and change and counts of change, I think it's important also for agencies to keep in mind that when we're talking about rates of change, we want to make sure that it's something that community action can actually is going to have the effect, or that, and there's not too many variables out there. For example, if you're talking about changing the unemployment number from 5.7% to 4.7% or something like that, there's an awful lot of different factors out there. A big factory may close and move to a different area or something like that. So to me, I'd like to caution agencies on when they're choosing the rate of change or that they're doing on all of the other outside influences, and is it really something that's measurable, that can be tracked community action? Am I in the right ballpark on that, or
Yeah, I mean, you certainly want to be able to show that you are making a change there, right? So there might be certain things that you just knowing your community think, this really isn't, there really isn't something we could do to make a dent in the employment rate, for example. And that's fine. So you might want to focus on, other specific things. Like I know an example we've seen is school readiness rates. And so they focus in one school district, and rather than just doing services like they usually do to, help their clients improve their school readiness, they're tracking the school readiness community-wide because they know this particular zip code has had an issue. And the reason they have an issue is because they just do not have access to the same resources as other people. And so what they did then is they created all of these like free library type of systems out there in the community, et cetera. So all of that is to say, it's a very, it's not, it was a rate for a specific school district. So that's a much more manageable rate that you could work towards, or childhood obesity rate in a particular school district. We also see examples like those, or homelessness rates in a very particular neighborhood. Yes, it would make sense to focus on a rate that you think you could actually make a dent in.
Yeah, so now that we've kind of have talked about what exactly a community initiative, community transformation program kind of looks at, we've talked about some examples of it, and so let's look at the reporting just for a couple seconds, and at what levels we report it, and where it kind of when it starts getting reported up the line. So again, as we've discussed. And I know for you, it's when we're looking at the national level, CSPG in Illinois is slightly different than Indiana, even in California or Florida or all these other states. So really at whenever OCS is defined kind of 4 different phases of a community project, and so our formative phase in Illinois would be reported through the scope of work. So when they write their scope of work, they talk about what they're going to do, how they're forming it, and then we get quarterly reports on it. So we would expect a written narrative, some sort of progress. This is what we've done this quarter, or this year on working towards that. So that's not something OCS really doesn't have the desire to know about it at that point. They want things to be a little bit more concrete, correct, on that. and then we move into more the formal planning phase, and that's when those reporting requirements become a little bit more, that's where we definitely want you to submit it as part of your annual report in module 3. Is that pretty standard across the country where that gets reported to the state at that level? Or
So honestly, I think every state is just doing it their own way, and they have their own processes. And honestly, I feel like some states have still not been able to quite digest the 4 phases yet and figure out how to incorporate it into their processes. But yeah, I mean, I think that is the way to go about it. So we know that OCS, in that same policy where they updated the definition for community, they came out with these 4 phases. And basically all they're saying is at the national level, right? Because we just have to keep that in mind, that OCS gets submissions from 1,000+ agencies, right? So there's just some logistics there also. That at the national level, OCS just wants to see how many initiatives are actively being implemented out there in the community as we speak. So prior to it being actively implemented, right, you go through, and these phases, I mean, they're just sort of more intuitive. You may or may not go through every single one. It really depends on your agency. But, for the most part, the formative is when you're just starting to get together, you're building coalitions. You don't really quite know yet maybe what the problem or what your strategy is going to be, or what your measured outcome is going to be, but you're starting to have those conversations with other stakeholders, and you're like, we know there's an issue here, we need to figure out how to fix the issue. So at that point, you could certainly talk with your state office and just tell them, here's what we're thinking, here's the direction we think we're going to be going in. By the formal planning phase, you really should, those conversations should really be leading towards, okay, well, now we know this is the goal we have in mind. Now let's talk about even more detailed specifics of exactly how we're going to get through that goal. What is the time frame for this goal, et cetera. So at that point, for sure, I would submit to your state so that they can see and work with you to, just to let you know, is this goal making sense to address the problem you're identifying? And just talk through all of those fine details, if you will. And then once all of those have been ironed out, you have your action plan, you know exactly what your goal is, you know what your target is, you know your time frame, you know what your strategies are. At this point, it's just a matter of moving forward on those things. That's when it starts becoming active. And at that point, it will be submitted to OCS. But yeah, so I would say that in those first 2 phases, you would work with your state office to fine tune the details and get it to where it's a complete picture.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that maybe every project doesn't go through all 4 phases. As we're talking about that, it kind of came to my head that it would be possible for an agency to have a community initiative that maybe they didn't come up with on themselves, but other people in the community came up with, and then they've been invited in after some of those phases is already, and we're already ready to actively implement it. But now we'd like to bring you on as a partner because we just found you or just realized that you have something good to bring to the table. And so they may come in there straight at that active implementation phase. Yeah.
You might come in even after they started.
Yeah.
At the point, basically, that, at the point that it reaches the national level, it just means that you need to know exactly what it is you guys are trying to do, right? You need to have a clear goal, a clear target. You know exactly what strategies you're engaging in. So if all of those were decided from a coalition beforehand, and now you joined the coalition, that's perfectly fine. You already have all of those laid out for you. And at that point, you are an active member of this project.
Yeah. So with that all being said, when I got approval to do these conversations with Adrian, I had to make promises to my bosses and everything because they know I'm a talker. They said, Adrian, there's no way you're going to keep it to 15 to 30 minutes. And I said, Adrian can do this. I'll keep it to 15 to 30 minutes. But for, I think the 3rd consecutive one of these I filmed, I am at 45 minutes. So I have proved them right for the 3rd time in this series. So I think I'd go ahead and like to wrap up a little bit, and do you have any closing or final comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, just that this was a great conversation. And I think you pointed out a lot of key points there, Adrian. So at NASCSP, we're always more than happy to help review anything. It can come to us through Adrian if you want. So we're always happy to review any ideas of initiatives you might have, and we can do sort of that pre-review for you guys before you decide to submit it and move it forward to OCS. So we're more than happy to be available.
Thank you very, very much for joining us. I've really enjoyed our discussions, and look forward to a return to some sense of normalcy where I can see you in person and have you back here or here to the state to present in front of everybody. But I hope everybody's enjoyed this conversation. And as always, if you have further questions, you can reach out to myself or Muska's on the NASCSP website. Her email address is there. Reach out to her. But hope everybody learned something and got something from this conversation. Thank you very much, Muska. Talk to you later.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.